BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Alright, hello, and it is Friday, and Anything Goes Friday. Thank you to everybody who listened to our bonus episode yesterday on the ethics of true crime, and that is available here on Black Box Online Radio. Anyone can check that out in the future. But today we're going back to 1988 to talk about a story that I've wanted to cover for some time now, and that is the murder of Myra Davis. Myra Davis was an actress who was perhaps more well known as Myra Jones, and even on her IMDb profile, she's still referred to as Myra Jones, and she was, of course, the stand-in for Janet Leigh in the very famous film Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. We've talked about some of this material in an episode that we did called Who is Robert Graysmith, because Robert Graysmith would go on to write a book that is somewhat about the murder of Myra Davis, but it's also about the story of a woman named Marley Renfro, because there's an enormous amount of confusion, even to this day, about who was working on the production of Psycho, and it really is quite shocking that all these different sources are just saying different things. But I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world. Lots of people are going off of different rumors or sayings, and people aren't verifying a lot of the claims that have been made, and they're just sort of going off material that isn't super certifiable. So Myra Davis was born on the 7th of November 1916 in Kansas, and she passed away on the 3rd of July 1988 at the age of 71 in California. She was raped and murdered, and her perpetrator got away for the longest time, but eventually they would find the guy, and his name is Kenneth Dean Hunt, and he is even referred to as the man who almost got away by this LA Times article that was written by Twyla Decker in 2001, just trying to keep up with citing the sources. And Kenneth Dean Hunt was a handyman, and I think let's just read a little bit here once again from this LA Times article. He was a handyman, the guy next door, a man with a record of sex crimes and aggressive outbursts. Yet Kenneth Dean Hunt, age 34, nearly managed to escape justice after raping and killing 2 women in his neighborhood. His crimes, a decade apart, were almost imperfect, but he managed to avoid detection. The first time a tip pointing in his direction didn't register with the police, and the second time investigators didn't realize a murder that had occurred. This is one of the most outrageous things that happened in this story, and I think the single most shocking thing isn't the connections that we would say about Marley Renfro, which we'll talk about in just a second, but as you heard, Myra Davis is murdered in 1988. Almost 10 years later, in the spring of 1998, a woman named Jean Orloff is murdered by the same individual, Kenneth Dean Hunt. Strangely though, it says 2.5 years later, in this LA Times article, but no, she was murdered in 1998. I mean, all the other sources say that. So, just to look at their segment here, though, Jean Orloff, a spunky 60-year-old with a soft spot for Mick Jagger and the Chicago Cubs, was found naked and dead in her apartment. Hunt had worked for her as a handyman as well, and a coroner's investigator and LA police sergeant determined that Jean Orloff, a smoker, had died of a heart attack, even though her loved ones and a fire captain suspected something more sinister. Orloff's body was shipped to a mortuary for cremation, and a second coroner's investigator summoned the mortuary to complete Orloff's death certificate and determined that she had not died of natural causes, as his colleague had surmised, but rather she had been raped and strangled. So, I mean, if you didn't catch that, her body is being sent to the crematorium, and at the very last minute, they decide to have a revision of the autopsy, and they determine not only was she murdered, but she was also raped in a very similar way to Myra Davis. And after that investigation, they were able to determine that the perpetrator was one and the same, and that led them to an individual named Kenneth Dean Hunt, who was 34 at the time. And in this LA Times article as well, they also say ultimately a tip from a relative was made to Hunt's parole officer, and that linked him to the killings not only of Jean Orloff, but also Myra Davis back in 1988. So as we said, more than a decade apart. Well, it's not really more than a decade, because Myra Davis was murdered. What did we say on July 1st, and Jean Orloff was murdered in the spring of 1998. So it's just short of 10 years. But I think the basic idea is in place. These crimes were quite a long distance apart. However, it really is perplexing that they just would have made that assumption that Jean Orloff would have died of a heart attack, natural causes, and they just didn't complete any of the important aspects of the investigation, like doing a rape kit, examining for signs of sexual assault, and that's all done at the last minute prior to the body being cremated. But this is a story that people often like to read about because not only of the horrific nature of the crimes that took place, but also they want to know about why there is such confusion surrounding the death of Myra Davis. And there's a better article, I think, actually, that was written by The Guardian and coming to us from Will Hodgkinson that was published in 2010. And just to read their introductory statement, it is one of the most notorious scenes ever filmed, yet Alfred Hitchcock and Janet Leigh didn't tell the truth about it. Will Hodgkinson on a real-life story of body doubles and murder. And the reason why the story does get a lot of attention is because even though Myra Davis was murdered in 1988, people often confuse her with another individual named Marley Renfro, and this confusion becomes the subject of Robert Graysmith's book, The Girl in Alfred Hitchcock's Shower. The long story short is that Myra Davis was the stand-in for Janet Leigh to check the lighting, to do the scenes that were not involving the shower scene in the movie Psycho, one of the most famous scenes in cinematic history. But Marley Renfro, who was one of the first Playboy playmates, and in one source she's even referred to as a stripper who was living in Las Vegas. I mean, I think you can get the idea there. She was hired to do the nude scenes in the shower. And what I heard from Marley Renfro herself on YouTube is not only is she simply behind the shower curtain and doing that scene as well, but she's actually the person that Anthony Perkins interacts with when like he rolls up her body and he carries her out to a car. That is Marley Renfro's actual body. So many times though, I thought in movies that when they're just doing those scenes where they just have to carry a dead person out to a car, I was like, they must just use some type of like stuffed up dummy or something like that. Or, like a human sized doll. I mean, if you're not even going to show the person on film, but there's just a body rolled up in a shower curtain or rolled up in a carpet. But what Marley Renfro said in her own words is her body is rolled up and then she was carried out to a car and just thrown into the back and just lands on metal. There's no pad, there's no cushion. And I mean, it's also just an intriguing world about the way that Alfred Hitchcock operated as a director, because the movie Psycho is based on a 1959 novel, and what Alfred Hitchcock did prior to the premiere of Psycho is he bought up all the copies that were available in like that had been published. He bought up all the copies of the novel so nobody could read it prior to the premiere, like, immediately prior to the premiere of Psycho. And he also would not allow anybody into the movie theater after the film had started. Hitchcock seems like a very strong perfectionist, and the movie Psycho was one of the first films that ever truly scared me. I mean, I would watch stuff like Friday the 13th, Halloween. Those things did not scare me at all. Even The Exorcist, I thought The Exorcist was silly, and we might even say that The Exorcist is a satirical comedy rather than a horror film. But Psycho was one of the first things that just terrified me, not because something is jumping out and grabbing at you, but also just because Alfred Hitchcock was someone who really knew how to make you terrified about what's on the other side of that door, what's going on in the basement and such. But let's look at Hodgkinson's article from 2010. In the run-up to the release of Psycho in 1960, Alfred Hitchcock did everything he could to build up suspense. No one was admitted to the theater after the start of each performance, and when the reviews for Psycho, which is re-released, came out, and they rolled in, they focused on one shocking moment, the shower sequence, in which Janet Leigh is slashed to death. Comprising of over 70 shots, each lasting 2 or 3 seconds, it has become one of the most infamous moments in horror-making movie history. Mixing fast-cutting and screeching music, Hitchcock created a brilliant illusion of gore, violence, and nudity, while actually showing very little. The greatest illusion, however, was to give a very clear suggestion that it was Janet Leigh being hacked to death by Anthony Perkins. Leigh, in her first interview after the film's release, shared the audience's horror. "I believe that the knife went into me. It was that real, that horrifying. I could feel it." But of course, it wasn't Janet Leigh in the shower scene. A lot of that, I think, is just a puff piece to drum up support for the film, which it goes on to become a classic. You wouldn't really think something like Psycho would need a puff piece. It kind of sells itself these days. But here it is where they refer to Marley Renfro as a Dallas-born stripper who worked in Las Vegas. Marley Renfro was one of the first Playboy bunnies. Apart from Psycho, she only appeared in one other film, Francis Ford Coppola's 1962 comedy western, Tonight for Sure. I definitely have to add that to my movie watching list if I can ever find a copy of it. Sometimes those westerns from like way back when are a little bit hard to track down, but I'm gonna see if I can find that one for sure. Then she disappeared, forgotten, until a news report in 2001 said that a 34-year-old handyman had been sentenced for raping and strangling her, a crime that occurred in 1988 but had gone unsolved for over a decade. So as you can see, there are already making the foundations of some confusion because Janet Leigh had a body double for the shower scene, Marley Renfro, and she had a stand-in for the other scenes that were done with clothing. And I think this is because Myra Davis refused to be shown in the nude, and either they had decided that for the shower scene she would wear a tan-colored swimsuit or like a melon-colored swimsuit that would be meant to mimic the effects of Caucasian skin. But that she may have also worn that for certain tests with the lighting and such, but of course it is Marley Renfro who is doing the nude scenes. And then the Associated Press actually had something out here in 2001 when they said that the handyman who had been convicted of killing 2 women, including an actress who was reported to have been the body double for Janet Leigh in the film Psycho, and it was said that Myra Davis and Marley Renfro were the same person. As we said, the confusion that surrounds the story. The actress was called Myra Davis, and subsequent press reports explain that this was Marley Renfro's real name. I would just like to add one side note. Myra Davis is her real name, but as we said at the beginning, her stage name was Myra Jones, and she would spend the later part of her career playing a grandmother-type figure in many different commercials. And this individual, Robert Graysmith, probed deeper into the story, certain that something didn't add up. And in 2007, he read an interview with Davis's granddaughter in which she expressed confusion at the shower connection. "My grandmother never would have done any nude work," she said. So then Graysmith made 2 discoveries. First, that Renfro and Davis were 2 separate people. See, why is anybody required to make this discovery, let alone somebody such as Robert Graysmith? Because you'd think that they would have some clearer records. I can understand that some far-out news reports from 2001, 2010 would have some confusion over who played what, but you'd think that it would be very easy to track down, like something just about who worked on the movie, let alone, not only do we have the records of people who've worked on the films in the 1930s and the 1920s and so on, but this is really where the story just goes all up and down and into a large set of twists and turns. And I should say that there's also a book out there called Body Double by Don Lasseter that is described as the horrifying true story of the brutal murders of one of Janet Leigh's body doubles in Psycho and another murder a decade later committed by a real-life Norman Bates. On June 3rd, 1988, Myra Davis, one of Janet Leigh's body doubles in Psycho, was found dead, raped and strangled in her Beverly Hills home. Her homicide remained unsolved until investigators linked her killing with that of a 60-year-old, Jean Orloff, who was sexually assaulted and strangled on March 28, 1998. Police arrested local handyman Kenneth Dean Hunt, who they believe, like Psycho's Norman Bates, targeted older women for vicious attacks with the help of DNA evidence. A jury found him guilty of both murders and finally ended his trail of terrifying violence. Now, this is another problem that is going on with this case, and I don't even know how legitimate it is because Robert Graysmith would also go on to theorize the way this individual Don Lasseter has that Kenneth Dean Hunt was heavily inspired by the movie Psycho, or that he was targeting Myra Davis because of her connections to the movie, and he's trying to become the real-life Norman Bates, not in some sort of unconscious way, but that he was doing it in a very calculated, copycat killer sort of way. And I don't necessarily believe that's true. I mean, I certainly haven't seen anything, and I'm sure that if you've even just listened to this far into the show, what really is the basis for this other than people being sensational and people are trying to drum up support and trying to sell a more horrifying story that this guy is trying to become the real life Norman Bates. And in one of the articles, they were talking about Robert Graysmith using his old tactics of connecting different ideas that shouldn't belong, and he was even going down the pathway that this individual, Kenneth Dean Hunt, who murdered Myra Davis in 1988, was actually trying to murder Marley Renfro because he thought that they were one and the same. Everybody thought that they were one and the same. And I think actually, if you go to the Wikipedia, you might find something about the book Body Double by Don Lasseter, and they will say that even Don Lasseter thought that these two individuals, Myra Davis and Marley Renfro, were one and the same. However, this little segment here from Goodreads.com that we just read off clearly indicates that they are different people. It talks about how Myra Davis was just one of the body doubles. But I think that this story is a lot simpler than people are leading it on to be. And in all reality, the confusion just exists about how people didn't seem to be that familiar with the records of the filmmaking industry. Now, there was an article that I had read a while back from KnowledgeNuts.com, and I know that's a very silly name, but we talked about that one during their episode on Who is Robert Graysmith. But they have something here where they say, in a nutshell, in 1988, actress Myra Davis was murdered in her California home, and the culprit was Kenneth Dean Hunt, a handyman with an incredibly sordid past. But as Graysmith, I guess we should say that as Robert Graysmith investigated the case, they discovered a strange connection to the Alfred Hitchcock horror classic, The Whole Bushel. Everybody knows Ed Gein was the inspiration for Psycho. All right, I can accept that. And someone even once wrote that you will have no idea how many horror films are actually inspired by the life of the serial killer Ed Gein, someone whom we've never talked about here on this channel. I mean, that is something that perhaps we should do in the future, just like serial killer Ed Gein, and just have some type of expose and try to learn a few more things about him, because I think there's a lot there. I mean, not only is there a lot there, that's the understatement of the millennium. Perhaps there's some new ways in which we can shed light on that subject. Ed Gein was one of America's most famous murderers and amateur interior decorators. Ew. This crazy Wisconsinite was the basis for Robert Bloch's 1959 novel, which in turn became the base for Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 horror film, Psycho. And the novel is of the same name, Robert Bloch's Psycho. And that was the book that Alfred Hitchcock purchased all the copies of so people couldn't read it right before the premiere, and they wouldn't know about the ending, and they wouldn't know about the surprises. So when most people think of the real-life Psycho murderer, they probably think of Ed Gein wearing the plaid cap, the horrifying figure who created his own furniture, and the infamous human skin suit. There was an excellent movie about Ed Gein made, though, called Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield, which stars Kane Hodder as Ed Gein. Kane Hodder, of course, from the Friday the 13th series, as well as the Hatchet films, playing Victor Crowley. Of course, Ed Gein isn't the only killer associated with the Alfred Hitchcock classic. In the early 1960s, journalists claimed Henry Adolph Bush, a California killer who strangled 3 women, was inspired by the black and white slasher flick. In fact, Bush actually took one of his victims to see the movie just hours before ending her life, but the theory doesn't really hold up, especially since Bush started his killing spree months before Psycho hit theaters. However, the only directly connected murder to the film itself occurred in 1988. The victim was Myra Davis, an elderly actress who made a living of doing commercials, but long before she was hawking cookies and lemonade on TV. I wish they wouldn't say it like that. I mean, nothing wrong with working as a commercial actress. Myra was working as Janet Leigh's body double on the set of Psycho, particularly during the iconic shower sequence. Well, I mean, we know that that's not true. It was Marley Renfro. And this is the one here that says, wearing a flesh-colored leotard because she wouldn't do nude scenes, Myra stood in for Lee whenever the film crew was needed to check the on-set lighting levels. Believe it or not, Myra kept pretty busy, even though the shower scene lasts only 3 minutes. See, now this is another thing that is just going down some of the basis for the old material. We know that it wasn't Myra Davis in the shower scene. We know that it was Marley Renfro now, and we will share some other things about that in just a second. But with Myra Davis, yes, indeed, she was murdered in 1988, and if you want to say that there's a direct connection to the movie Psycho, all right, she worked on the production, and she was the stand-in for a character that got murdered. I don't think that's giving away any type of spoiler. But in regards to having Psycho as a direct inspiration to Kenneth Dean Hunt, it sounds more like he was someone who was a mentally unstable individual who was living a life of criminal behavior, and Myra Davis was an unfortunate and vulnerable victim. She fell into a very tragic situation. I think that this is also doing what they said about this other individual here, Henry Adolph Bush, excuse me. They're trying to make it sound like a better story, when in all reality, these people just have murderous and homicidal tendencies, and that really is the basis for the material. And we will say something more about this after a quick break. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to talk about some of the ways in which you can help Black Box Online Radio. This channel relies on your support, and the best way you can help out is just by listening to some more content. If you like what you hear, you can hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends on social media. But I should also say that Black Box Online Radio now has a Teespring page, and there will be some links in the description box. Please feel free to check out some of the merchandise that is available. Almost all sizes and colors are listed. So, you can also help out by going over to the Zodiac Killer channel and watching the documentary series Obsession into Darkness, parts 1, 2, and 3. I was one of the contributors for that, and you can see some other great Zodiac content on the Zodiac Killer channel. And yes, there will be a part 4 of Obsession into Darkness at some point in the future. And for now, let's get back to the show. Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. Just one quick announcement, though, before we continue. There is a book out there about this subject, right, that we read off called The Girl in Alfred Hitchcock's Shower by Robert Graysmith. But I do have to make a confession. I have not read that book because it was poorly received by a lot of the reviewers, and Robert Graysmith is somebody, as a true crime writer, who has developed somewhat of a lousy reputation for himself in terms of his credibility, and also the accusations that Graysmith likes to play around with the facts and blending them in with fiction. If you would like to hear more about that, we do touch upon this material in our episode, Who is Robert Graysmith? And a link to that will be included in the in the pinned-in comment that is on the top. If you go down there, you can find that episode, and you'll hear some explanations and deep reasons about how Graysmith manipulated some of the information in his book, The Girl in Alfred Hitchcock's Shower. So I would invite anybody to listen to that. And if we're going to be talking about the murder of Myra Davis and the story of Marley Renfro, I would like to hear Marley Renfro in her own words. So let's listen to a clip that has come from People magazine, and this is from People magazine's stories of Untold Hollywood. Yes, that's right. Untold Stories of Hollywood. I think I just confused a couple words there. But let's hear Marley Renfro.
I was Janet Leigh's acting body double in the shower scene of Psycho. I got into show business. I started out, I did a lot of pinup modeling. Anyway, working with one of the photographers, Mario Caselli. He said, they're looking for a model or something like that at Universal Studios. So he gave me the name of who to contact, and I was interviewed by Mr. Hitchcock, and I had to disrobe, and then took me into Janet Leigh's, I guess she was in her dressing room or trailer, wherever, and I had to disrobe for her because our bodies were very similar, and I think that's the reason that I got hired for that. Working with Mr. Hitchcock, he knew exactly what he wanted with every shot. Saul Bass did the storyboard, and just about every camera angle was already on paper. But where we definitely had to do a second take is when Tony Perkins has pulled me out of the shower and has wrapped me up in the shower curtain. Well, he reaches down to pick me up, and he gets me up about 6 inches and bang, lets me go because he didn't have his body, set to, because I was dead weight. So that was the second take on that. Then he takes me out and to dump me in the trunk. That was an uncomfortable one because they just had it was just metal at the bottom of the trunk. They didn't have a blanket or anything like that. So he dumped me in there, and to me it was a bag. Otherwise, I enjoyed working with him.
Good. You satisfied with your cabin?
About 2 or 3 weeks after I finished Psycho, this is in December of '59, Playboy contacted me, and they flew me to Chicago, where I shot the cover of September 1960. It's when Psycho came out, and my roommate, she says, oh, Psycho's out, let's go see it. And I thought, oh, how boring.
Okay, and those were the words of Marley Renfro talking about the shower scene in Psycho. And there is an extended interview with Marley Renfro on the channel Greg Gilbert. One more time, Greg Gilbert, and it's called Python's Paradise number 286, if anyone. It's actually an interview that she did on a Canadian radio station from New Brunswick, Canadian radio show from New Brunswick, I should say. But I'm still quite baffled as to why there is such an enormous amount of confusion in regards to Myra Davis and Marley Renfro. It seems so clear and obvious looking back in the past that they are two separate people. And as you heard, Marley Renfro in her own words there, and I should say at the time of this recording she is still alive, as you heard in her own words there, she just did the shower scene, but many actors all up and down all across the history of Hollywood have used a stand-in, as you heard, to test lighting and such, and that was a different person. Her name was Myra Davis, and one of the accusations that Graysmith wants to put forward in the book is just that everybody was confusing them. Everybody was mixing up Marli Renfro and Myra Davis, and that this individual, Kenneth Dean Hunt, simply thought that they were the same person. So he was actually also trying to target Marli Renfro because he thought Myra Davis and Marli Renfro were the same person, and that is when the story gets a little bit more sensational. Another announcement, and just sharing something, the show Cold Case Files has an episode on this called Death Before I Do / Hollywood Homicide. It was Season 3, Episode 17, and their description is, police crack a cold case of murder when a mysterious woman calls to say that her boyfriend is the killer, and the murder of a woman in 1998 provides clues to the 1988 murder of actress Myra Davis, a stand-in for Janet Leigh in the movie Psycho, and as we said, once again, the perpetrator was Kenneth Dean Hunt. And right now, I would like to go to an article from bbc.co.uk, bbcnews.co.uk, that's going to talk about what happened after the sentencing of the 34-year-old handyman Kenneth Hunt. Hunt was convicted of strangling 2 women, including an actress who played the voice of Norman Bates's mother in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Oh, I should also say that was mentioned in some other sources. Not only did Myra Davis do the stand-in work for Janet Leigh, but she also played the voice of Bates's mother, and I guess you can see the movie to find out what they're talking about with that. Kenneth Dean Hunt was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder in Los Angeles on Thursday. The body of actress Myra Davis, age 71, was found in her West Los Angeles home in 1988, but Hunt was not connected to her murder for 10 years. Hunt's second victim, Jean Orloff, was murdered in 1998, and police quickly connected the 2 crimes. Myra Davis was originally a dancer for MGM Studios and had acted in the 1960 Hitchcock classic under the name Myra Jones, as well as providing the voice of Norman Bates's mother in the movie Psycho. Miss Davis appeared to be Janet Leigh's body double in the movie Psycho as well. Her hand can be seen clutching the shower curtain as Leigh's character, Marion Crane, is stabbed to death by Norman Bates, who was played by Anthony Perkins, in a scene that has become one of the most famous in film history. Psycho was a low-budget black-and-white film, the success of which was boosted by clever marketing. It was an unconventional and daring film both in its subject matter, and the film included the first love scene in American popular cinema ever to feature a pair of lovers lying half-naked on a bed, and its masterful technique. A 1998 remake of the movie was made by Good Will Hunting director Gus Van Sant and starred Julianne Moore and Anne Heche, and was critically panned. Now, if I recall from that 1998 film, was that the one that also mentioned, that also had Vince Vaughn in it, rather? And if you're wondering about how the police were able to find the similarities in between these 2 murders, an article from the New Haven Register that was put out in 2001 talks about it was the similarities in which these 2 women were strangled, Jean Orloff and Myra Davis. And if we just look at their exact quotation here, it wasn't until Orloff's family was preparing to have her body cremated that it was discovered that she had been strangled. Police quickly linked the 2 killings, noting the victims had similar markings on their neck, and both women had been raped and their houses had been burglarized. So when you hear the stuff about the burglaries taking place, I think that that would really diminish Robert Graysmith's theory that this individual was targeting both Myra Davis and Marley Renfro at the same time, thinking that they were one and the same. And that is, I guess, what we can put in the category of Graysmith using some overreaches in his quote-unquote research process. Myra Davis, age 71, had appeared in the movie Psycho under the name Myra Jones. Okay, we heard that again, but we should say that in 2001, at the age of 34, was when Kenneth Dean Hunt was indeed found guilty of this, and 2 counts of first-degree murder, and he was facing the death penalty for a time. But I think at the time of this recording, he is still alive, because Kenneth Dean Hunt was sentenced when he was 35 the next year to life without the possibility of parole, and I would like to cite the Desert News. This is desert.com actually, but it's Desert News from their article November 7th, 2001. The handyman convicted of strangling 2 women, including the actress who appeared as Janet Leigh's body double in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kenneth Dean Hunt killed Myra Davis when she was 71 years old in 1988, and Jean Orloff when she was 60 years old in 1998. So there you have it. That's just a little blurb from Desert News, but he was sentenced and convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And as I said, I believe he is still alive at the time of this recording, but he will not be getting out of jail. So I think that is going to wrap things up for us, but I highly recommend you listen to our episode on who is Robert Graysmith, because you can also learn about some things that we share about Robert Graysmith and his faux research process, more or less, and some of the shady things that he is up to. But I think anybody who has listened to this episode here, and as I mentioned, you can hear that extended interview with Marley Renfro on Greg Gilbert's channel, as well as some other things like the People magazine segment that we played off here in its entirety, as well as some other things on Black Box Online Radio. Alright, well, that's all for me now, and I will see you guys on Instagram for the bonus podcast, and then again on Monday for some new things about the Zodiac Killer. Everybody, thank you, and until next time.